Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
I didn't expect much from the family barbecue. I never did. Each time Karina reminded me of the date, I felt a quiet knot tighten in my chest, equal parts dread and resignation. My anticipation for their gatherings had long since faded, replaced by an almost ritualistic acceptance that once I walked through their sliding glass doors, I would be cordially ignored or politely sidelined. My wife's insistence stemmed from a desire to maintain appearances, to reassure her family that I was a willing participant in their boisterous traditions, but their treatment of me made it clear that I was more of an afterthought than an actual guest. I was welcome only insofar as I didn't get in the way, an invisible actor on the periphery of their carefully choreographed performance. Growing up, I had devised strategies for blending into crowds, for fading into the background so thoroughly that no one questioned my silence. As a logistics consultant, I managed complex supply chains, negotiated contracts behind closed doors, and handled a portfolio of high-profile clients who depended on my discretion. My success was quiet, almost secretive. An irony that amused me privately, since it allowed me to cultivate a reputation as just the mailman among the people I cared about least. I rarely spoke of my work, preferring to let the numbers and outcomes speak for themselves. In meetings, I wore tailored suits and carried a leather briefcase filled with spreadsheets and proposals, but at home and at family events, I chose understated attire, a plain polo, well-worn slacks, and shoes polished enough to be respectable but not flashy. My appearance was a deliberate camouflage. The backyard was alive with the hum of conversation and the hiss of the gas grill. The scent of charcoal and smoked ribs mingled with the sweet undertones of sodas and punch. Laughter erupted in bursts as cousins and in-laws traded barbs and compliments with equal gusto, and the clink of plastic cups punctuated their sentences. Children darted between legs, chasing a frisbee or tugging at a loose strand of yarn from braided blankets. I stationed myself near the fence, where the shade of the old oak tree provided relief from the afternoon sun, and watched as Karina flitted through the crowd, delivering platitudes on my behalf. She greeted her aunts with kisses, posed for selfies with her cousins, and intermittently glanced in my direction as if seeking reassurance that I was tolerating the occasion. Her eyes, warm and apologetic, betrayed concern for my discomfort, but she never quite knew how to bridge the gulf between me and her family. I sipped my drink slowly, savoring the tang of lemonade and the cool sting of mint. My silence drew attention now, and then, an eyebrow raised here, a pointed glance there, but no one questioned it outright. It was easier for them to accept that I was reserved than to confront the possibility that I might be withholding something. Beneath their laughter and small talk, I sensed a current of condescension. They assumed I lacked ambition, that my day-to-day revolved around routine deliveries and postal routes. To them, I was an archetype, a convenient trope that underscored their own accomplishments. My quiet nature only reinforced their assumptions, and I did nothing to correct them. As long as I maintained the illusion, I remained unthreatening. Midway through the afternoon, I caught a glimpse of Karina's grandmother, seated on a folding chair beside a table of potato salad and coleslaw. Her posture was regal despite the plastic furniture, and her gaze drifted over the assembled family, as though she were the conductor of an invisible orchestra. She regarded me with the same cool appraisal I had come to expect, politely detached, perhaps even mildly amused by my presence. In that moment, I felt a flicker of something akin to pity, as if she recognized the disparity between what I appeared to be and what I actually was. But that recognition didn't translate into compassion or curiosity. Instead, it only cemented her belief that I was content in my role. I wondered if anyone would ever ask what drove me, what accomplishments lay hidden behind my modest exterior. Karina approached me then, her smile radiant but her eyes shadowed by unease. She lingered for a heartbeat, as if to draw strength from my nearness, before guiding me toward the buffet. "Would you like anything?" she asked, voice low. I nodded, grateful for the chance to move. At the table, she loaded my plate with a morsel of barbecued chicken, a scoop of macaroni salad, and a handful of green beans. Each bite was flavorful, a reminder of how much I appreciated the simple pleasures I seldom allowed myself to enjoy. With every chew, I resolved to treasure these moments, however uncomfortable the surroundings. I glanced around once more, observing the awkward exchanges and the familiar hierarchy that dictated interactions. My status as an outsider had become comfortable in its predictability, but today it felt brittle, ready to crumble under the weight of something unforeseen. The air felt charged, as though the conversation threads might snap any second and reveal a deeper truth. My pulse quickened at the thought, but I didn't avert my eyes. If fate had consulted me, I would have asked for calm, for another hour of polite neglect. But this time, fate had other plans. I had barely taken a step into the backyard when I felt the first prick of disdain. Karina's sister, Blair, had already located me across the lawn, her bright heels sinking into the summer grass as she made her approach. She was a force of nature. Loud, proud, and impossibly polished, her laughter ringing like a bell through the chatter of cousins and in-laws. I watched, nearly invisible, as she swept through the gathering, surveying the scene with smug satisfaction, as though every raised eyebrow and whispered remark belonged to her personally. A glass of wine perched precariously between her slender fingers, she moved with the assured gait of someone who had never known quiet or restraint. "Look who finally decided to show," she called out, voice dripping with false warmth. She paused before me, tilted her head, and let her gaze roam from my understated polo to my well-worn loafers. "I was beginning to think you were going to skip out on us this year, Mr. Mailman." A ripple of giggles followed, and I felt the tendrils of embarrassment wind around my chest. Karina was nowhere in sight, likely distracted by peals of laughter from her cousins, but I could almost feel her eyes searching for an escape. I said nothing, letting her words hang between us like low-hanging branches. Silence, I had learned, was often the most potent response. It invited curiosity, and sometimes it even unsettled the speaker. Blair, however, was undeterred. She leaned in, as if to share a secret, and lowered her voice so that only her friend beside her could hear. I caught the words anyway. "Ignore him. He's just a mailman." The friend echoed a faint chuckle, the kind tethered to gossip and scorn. Wine lifted their tone to something too casual, too carefree. In all the years I had endured her barbs, none cut deeper than that moment of collective dismissal. The lack of awareness she displayed, her assumption that I did nothing more than deliver letters and packages, was testament to the distance she maintained between my world and hers. I watched her walk away, her hips swaying with triumph, and I felt a flash of irritation bloom inside me. But the same irritation had lived there for years, hidden behind a veneer of calm. I took a breath, inhaled the scent of barbecue smoke and summer heat, and reminded myself that this battlefield was hers alone. When Karina finally reappeared, she placed a hand gently on my arm. Her expression was apologetic. "I'm sorry," she murmured, but the words were lost in the cacophony of familial banter. I shook my head lightly. "Don't apologize for her," I said, voice low. "She thrives on this." She nodded, eyes downcast, as though relieved that I acknowledged the struggle. But I knew she hated conflict, always had, and seeing her shrink away from confrontation made my own task harder. I forced myself to stand tall, to let my posture convey that I would not be cowed. Across the yard, Blair had rallied a small group of women by the picnic table. I could hear her over the clatter of utensils and plates as she dissected my outfit, the way my shirt hung too loosely, the scuff on my left shoe, the plainness of my watch. She cataloged every perceived flaw with the precision of a merciless appraiser. I was suffocating in that attention, yet I refused to look her way. Instead, I let my gaze drift over the familiar faces of Karina's family. Cousins I barely knew, aunts whose names escaped me, uncles busy exchanging golf stories. All of them welcomed Blair's performance, her mockery validating their own indifference toward me. I remembered why I had chosen to play the invisible man for so long. The fewer expectations they had of me, the less I risked disappointment. But with each whispered jab, I felt the walls I'd constructed around myself begin to tremble. For years I had derived comfort from their ignorance. Let them think I delivered letters while I managed their parent company. But now, I wondered, did I deserve the weight of their scorn simply because I had allowed them to misunderstand me? The thought prickled like an accusation, yet it also ignited a spark of resolve. A soft breeze rustled the leaves overhead and carried the faint melody of conversation from the back deck. A cousin asked another about his job, and the answer was delivered with boastful pride. Plans to expand into new markets, cutting-edge strategies for doubling revenue. The reporter soaked up the praise, entirely unaware that the next opportunity lay in my hands. I swallowed hard and stepped forward, closing the distance between myself and the group. Blair paused mid-sentence, her lips parting as if to lob another insult. Instead, I offered her a nod, cool, measured, controlled, and said, "Enjoy the afternoon." Her brows furrowed, uncertainty flickering across her features. The women beside her chimed a hesitant laugh, but I saw the confusion in their eyes. They had expected the same submissive silence as every other year. What they got instead was an inscrutable calm that foreshadowed the reveal to come. I felt the tension in my shoulders ease slightly, as though I had pushed back against an invisible force. Karina approached again, placing her hand on my back, a gesture of solidarity rather than pity. Her eyes held a question. "Are you sure?" But I didn't hesitate. I turned my attention back to the gathering, inhaling the aroma of roasting meat and damp earth. This barbecue had become an audition, and I was ready to step out of the shadows. The jabs and jokes that had defined my role here for so long no longer held power over me. I would keep my secrets for now, letting the silence between us widen until the moment was right. And when that moment came, their laughter would die on their lips. But for this afternoon, I would simply stand among them. Seen, yet not yet revealed, mindful of the game that stretched before me. I arrived on foot that afternoon, choosing a winding route along quiet streets so I could slip into the backyard unseen. My attire was intentionally nondescript, a soft gray tee, dark jeans worn at the knees, and low-top canvas shoes that had seen better days. I tucked my phone into my back pocket and carried only a light windbreaker in case the evening air turned cool. No briefcase, no watch that screamed success. Just me, in my most neutral form, blending effortlessly into the suburban backdrop. My goal was simple, to administer my surprise as subtly as possible, letting curiosity bloom before I struck. As I stepped through the sliding glass door, the usual chorus of voices washed over me, Karina's cousin Zoe gossiping near the buffet table, a cluster of uncles nodding over sports scores, children squealing in a circle around the sprinkler. I inhaled deeply, tasting the sweet tang of melting popsicles and the earthy hint of fresh-cut grass. Everything was in perfect equilibrium, tension held in reserve, waiting only for a catalyst. I moved to the margin of the gathering, tucking my jacket over one arm as I scanned for the right moment. Then, without warning, it happened. A sleek black Tesla glided into the driveway, its electric hum dissolving the noise of the neighborhood like a ripple through water. The car's polished surface reflected the late afternoon sun, gleaming with an almost predatory sheen. It rolled to a smooth stop beside Blair's pristine SUV, and I watched the entire scene tilt on its axis. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Plates paused inches from mouths. Even the sprinkler seemed to falter, dangling frozen droplets in the air. Blair was the first to notice. She was leaning in to criticize the grill master's seasoning. An expression of superiority painted across her face when her gaze snapped to the newcomer. Her hand went slack around the paper plate she held, and ribs tumbled onto the grass in a crimson smear. The collective gasp from those closest to her echoed sharply. She stared at the Tesla as though it might explode, eyes wide with something between shock and indignation. The backyard, once filled with the easy rhythms of chatter and laughter, descended into a thick hush. Even the cicadas that usually orbited the fence line paused as if the world had stopped turning. I turned fully, curiosity nibbling at the edges of my composure. A tall figure emerged from the driver's seat, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that spoke of corporate power. His hair, dark with streaks of silver, was combed back neatly, and those piercing gray eyes seemed to catalog everything in a single glance. I recognized him instantly. Gregory Holt, the CEO of the holding company that I'd founded and quietly directed from the background. He was known for being decisive, cold, and almost never making appearances at social functions. If he spoke, employees hung on every syllable. If he moved, markets watched. And yet here he was, stepping onto the lawn of the family I'd learned to quietly despise. My pulse quickened. This was the moment I had orchestrated with precision, but even so, I felt a flicker of awe at his presence. He closed the Tesla door with a soft click and walked toward me with all the authority of a man who knew his power. Each footfall was deliberate, measured against the rhythm of stunned silence. The hum of the grill, the soft clink of cutlery, the distant laughter of the children, all had been swallowed by the weight of his entrance. When he reached me, he offered his hand. "Mr. Callan, sir," he said, voice calm. carrying the timbre of authority and respect. His handshake was firm, the kind that leaves no doubt about who holds the upper hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." His tone was curious but not mocking, as though he respected my decision to come on foot in disguise and admired the ingenuity of the reveal. I kept my smile composed, allowing the celebration of his arrival to play out on those around us. "Gregory," I replied, matching his firmness. "I'm glad you found the place." My words carried double weight. A personal acknowledgement and a signal to my in-laws that the game had changed. The backyard remained dead silent. Plates lay forgotten, conversations hung suspended, and even the birds seemed paralyzed mid-flight. Then a faint chirp broke the stillness, a robin from the fence post recovering from its own shock. But by then, the shock had spread. Relatives exchanged bewildered glances, aunts clutched their pearl necklaces as if for protection, and children peered from behind legs, sensing a drama unfolding beyond their understanding. Blair looked as though she might collapse. Her usual bravado had drained away, leaving her pale and wide-eyed. She no longer held a position of dominance. Instead, she seemed small and vulnerable under the combined force of our silent, powerful guest. A bead of sweat appeared at her temple as she struggled to form words. Finally, she managed a whisper. "Why? Why is he here?" Gregory glanced at her with polite detachment and offered no explanation. Instead, he turned back to me, the hint of a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I heard there was a gathering worth attending. His voice held an unspoken promise that his attendance would change everything. I unclipped the jacket from my arm and draped it over my shoulder, returning his smirk with a steady gaze. Around us, the guests began to shift uncertainly, drawn into our silent exchange. "It was going well," I said, voice low enough for only him to hear, "until you arrived." His brow lifted, and he leaned in, as though the secret we shared demanded intimacy. "Precisely," he murmured, and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before moving off to the buffet, leaving a trail of stunned faces in his wake. I watched him walk away, the grace of his stride and the gleam of his presence cutting through the afternoon haze. In that moment, I felt an exhilarating rush of control. I had summoned the architect of their downfall to my personal theater, and every one of them was an unwilling audience. The barbecue would never be the same, and neither would I. You could have heard a grape drop on the lawn. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, casting dappled patterns on the grass, but even the gentle warmth couldn't thaw the stunned silence that paralyzed the backyard. Plates hung at midair, drinks paused halfway to thirsty lips, and every conversation ground to a halt. It was as if time itself had paused to witness the moment I shed my camouflage and revealed the truth that none of them suspected. Blair's eyes flickered between me and Gregory, her boss, my employee, who stood nonchalantly by the buffet table as though he'd simply wandered over for a second helping of potato salad. Her boss, the man she had fawned over at board meetings and treated like the pinnacle of her professional life, was now the living proof of something she never fathomed. Karina's cousin Zoe, usually quick with a snarky comment or a teasing quip, froze with her hand steadying a bowl of coleslaw. Her wide eyes darted first to me, then to Gregory. I fought down a swell of satisfaction at witnessing her astonishment. The relationships this family prided themselves on, those carefully maintained social hierarchies, crumbled in that single heartbeat of revelation. Lorraine, Karina's mother, clutched her pearls so tightly they trembled. Her pursed lips parted slightly, as though she were struggling to find a syllable that could articulate the shock rippling through her. Meanwhile, Harold, Karina's father, turned pale, a hot dog halfway to his mouth, and let it fall onto his plate with a wet thud. Blair swayed like a tree caught in a sudden gust of wind. She looked as though she might faint, but her pride flared stubbornly against the wave of humiliation threatening to consume her. "Wait, you're the CEO?" she stammered, voice high and tight. The question hung in the air, absurd in its innocence. She could barely form the words, as though her mind refused to accept the reality before her. She who had so carelessly dismissed me as just a mailman, now faced the man whose decisions shaped her career. The woman who prided herself on business acumen now discovered that her achievements, and indeed her very livelihood, were subject to my quiet authority. Gregory Holt offered her a polite nod, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he said, voice soft but carrying. Across the stillness like a judicious gavel. He took a casual sip from his drink, as if discussing the weather rather than delivering a verdict that would resonate through every department of her company. The sight of him sipping that sparkling water, unhurried and composed, only deepened the hush that enveloped us. He relished his role as unwitting accomplice in my unveiling, and I understood that his presence here served both my amusement and my strategic objectives. I raised my glass slowly, the fizz tickling the sides as I took a deliberate sip, savoring the moment. My gaze swept across the assembled faces, searching for the reactions that would confirm the impact of this revelation. The cousins clustered near the fence shifted uncomfortably, as though they were suddenly uncertain whether to continue their chatter or flee. And Aunt half smiled, then her expression turned sheepish. Even the children paused their game of tag, cocking their heads as they watched the grown-ups with curiosity and growing unease. I felt a serene calm wash over me, a stark contrast to the storm of emotion swirling among my in-laws. Blair found her voice again, though it wobbled like a poorly tuned instrument. But I thought you delivered parcels? Her mouth formed the words as though tasting something bitter for the first time. The notion that I might balance both identities. A humble delivery man and a high-powered executive was inconceivable to her. Her worldview, built on conspicuous displays of wealth and status, offered no room for the quiet complexities that defined me. I responded gently, letting my tone convey both grace and authority. "Sometimes I do," I said, setting my glass on a nearby table and turning fully toward her. "It keeps me grounded." The words were simple, but they resonated with a deeper truth. I chose to maintain my anonymity because I understood the value of perspective. In the humbleness of a uniform, in the routine of a postal route, I remembered the importance of every link in the chain. Without the mail carriers, packages didn't reach doorsteps. Without the warehouse workers, inventory didn't move. My foundation was built on subtle knowledge of every layer, and that understanding fortified my leadership. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they digested my response. Karina's mother opened her mouth, presumably to chastise my candor, but her voice caught in her throat. Karina herself stepped closer, concern etched on her face. She mouthed the word sorry, but I waved her off gently. This moment wasn't about her apology. It was about securing my place in their eyes, about demanding the respect I had long been denied. I reached out and took Karina's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. She drew strength from the contact, her shoulders straightening as though bolstered by shared purpose. Harold cleared his throat, diverting attention from his daughter's predicament. "Well, look at you," he exclaimed, voice quivering with forced enthusiasm. "Our son-in-law, a tycoon. Why didn't you say anything?" His question echoed around the yard, an unwitting admission that none of them had bothered to ask. Their assumptions, built on my silence, had blinded them to a reality that stood in plain sight. I met his gaze respectfully, because when I was silent, I replied, voice firm and unafraid. "You all showed me exactly who you are." The words struck like stones dropped in still water, sending concentric ripples through every relationship present. I let the quiet linger, the weight of my statement settling over them like twilight. It was neither boastful nor spiteful. It was simply the truth laid bare. Blair tried to interject again, to reclaim some shred of dignity, but her words sputtered and faltered. It was Gregory who interrupted, stepping forward with measured politeness. "Also, sir," he said, addressing Harold with a slight bow of his head, "Mr. Callan is the reason you still have a job. There was a recommendation to downsize your department. He blocked it." His revelation landed like a thunderclap. Harold's face drained of color, and guests exchanged horrified glances. The man who had once treated me as a disposable outsider was now entirely dependent on my goodwill. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of closure. The family barbecue had always been a venue for their evaluation of me, but today, the scales had fallen from their eyes. They had seen me at my office, hidden behind spreadsheets and suit jackets, but most importantly, they had seen me here. Reclaiming my narrative, dismantling their assumptions, and redefining my place in their lives. The background noise of their gossip faded into a respectful hush, leaving only the truth reverberating through the backyard air. The whispers began almost immediately, soft at first, like the hiss of steam escaping a teapot, then swelling into a chorus of speculation that rippled through the backyard. Lorraine, Karina's mother, clutched her pearls so tightly that they rattled against her chest, her eyes darting between me and the stunned faces of her guests. My gaze remained steady, anchored to the low wooden fence where clusters of green ivy quivered in the afternoon breeze. I had stepped onto this stage knowing my audience would shift uncomfortably in their seats. What I did not anticipate was how quickly the roles would reverse. The woman who once dismissed me as just the mailman now bowed her head as if caught in the glare of an unexpected spotlight. With practiced calm, I lifted my drink and took a sip, letting the bubble-laden sweetness settle on my tongue. The tang of citrus and the cool chill of ice grounded me, a brief respite from the sudden tension that crackled around us. Blair hovered nearby, her husband awkwardly positioning himself as a buffer, her eyes red-rimmed with confusion and humiliation. She stared at me, her lips parting as though to speak, only to swallow the words I knew would betray her pride. Karina hovered at my side, her hand brushing lightly against my arm, an unspoken plea for gentleness. But I knew that if I softened now, the lesson would slip away like sand through fingers. They needed to taste every crumb of this humble pie. Lorraine's trembling voice finally rose above the hum of insect wings. "But I was so sure of who you were," she stammered. "You never said otherwise." Her accusation tumbled into the grass, where it dissipated, powerless. I set my drink down on the edge of a picnic table, planting my feet firmly in the ground. "Because I allowed you to believe it," I said, voice measured and calm. "Silence can be more revealing than words." I paused, letting the heft of that statement sink in. I watched as realization dawned in her eyes, a flicker of remorse lighting her expression before shame replaced it. Across the yard, Harold cleared his throat loudly, drawing attention to himself with a cough that echoed like a gavel. He patted at his suit jacket pocket, as if searching for a microphone that might magnify his authority. "Well, if you'd wanted us to know any different, you could have told us," he said, tone half accusatory, half bewildered. He glanced at Karina, as though she should have known better. I met his gaze steadily. "I married your daughter for who she is," I replied. "Not for the extravagant introductions or the accolades here." I looked at Karina then, and she nodded slightly, drawing strength from the truth in my eyes. "My accomplishments speak for themselves. I didn't need your approval, just your honesty." An aunt, Mrs. Henderson, the one who had offered me extra potato salad earlier, approached, smoothing her floral dress with trembling hands. "Perhaps we were too quick to judge," she murmured, eyes downcast. "You must forgive us." Her apology was genuine, the first to emerge unshadowed by ego. I inclined my head in acknowledgement. "I forgive you," I said quietly, "but I would hope we can all learn from this." The simplicity of my words seemed to recalibrate the atmosphere, shifting the weight of expectation from me back onto their own sense of humility. Blair retreated toward the drinks cooler, where she clutched a glass of wine as though it were a lifeline. I followed her with my eyes, noting the way her shoulders trembled beneath the weight of her sister's mother's stare. She caught my gaze and flinched, as though I were poised to deliver another blow. Instead, I offered her a small, almost pitying smile. "I don't wish to ruin your life," I said, voice softening. "I simply want you to understand the consequences of assumptions." Her lip trembled, her polished veneer cracking. She swallowed hard, then raised her chin, as though challenging me to further confrontation. I shook my head gently. "Perhaps it's better we both start anew." As I turned away, the murmurs softened into a contemplative hush. Guests exchanged glances that acknowledged the shift, no longer mere observers of my perceived insignificance. They now recognized in me a quiet authority they had once dismissed. I strolled toward the fence where the children had resumed their game of tag, the sound of their laughter a bright counterpoint to the adult awkwardness. Karina caught up to me, slipping her hand into mine. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "for standing firm." I squeezed her hand, feeling the warmth of her admiration ripple through me. "Always," I murmured. Together, we walked back toward the gathering, our joined presence a symbol of unity. Lorraine stepped forward, her posture straighter, her shoulders squared with newfound respect. "Would you honor us by staying for dinner?" she asked, voice steady now, stripped of pretense. I returned her gaze with a nod. "I'd be glad to," I replied. At that moment, the backyard seemed transformed, no longer a battleground for silent indignities but a space where truths could be spoken and received without fear. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with cautious goodwill. Conversations resumed, this time tinged with genuine interest rather than hollow courtesy. An uncle asked me about my work, not because he felt obligated, but out of real curiosity. Blair, still red-faced, offered a tentative apology that I accepted with an encouraging nod. Children ran around us, their joyous squeals knitting the pieces of normalcy back together. The sky deepened into molten gold as the sun dipped lower, casting the party in a warm, forgiving glow. As I lifted my glass for a second toast, this time alongside Lorraine and Harold, I felt a sense of closure settle over me. The taste of humble pie lingered on everyone's lips, but it was tempered by the sweetness of redemption. I looked at Karina, her eyes bright in the fading light, and knew that our marriage would emerge stronger for having weathered this test. In that moment, I understood that true respect was won not through grand gestures, but through revealing one's authentic self and daring others to see you, flaws and all. The transformation that rippled through the company began quietly, without fanfare or warning. I sat in the boardroom, the late morning sun spilling across the polished oak table as the senior executives filed in and took their seats. The air hummed with a familiar blend of anticipation and anxiety. This was where I thrived, where strategic decisions took shape behind closed doors, affecting thousands of employees and countless stakeholders. As chairman, I wielded influence with precision, yet I had never delivered a blow quite like the one awaiting Blair. The board meeting commenced with the usual formalities, a roll call, the approval of minutes from the previous session, and perfunctory updates on routine matters. My gaze drifted toward Blair, who sat rigidly in her chair, cheeks still flushed from the barbecue debacle. She attempted a polite smile but glanced nervously at the projection screen displaying the first agenda item, restructuring and efficiency optimization. Murmurs rippled through the room as her colleagues exchanged curious glances. I leaned back, arms folded, letting the weight of expectation settle over the group. Mr. Callan, the CEO began, his voice steady as he introduced the proposals. We've identified several areas where operational costs can be reduced while maintaining, or even improving, service quality. I'll review each department's metrics and propose changes. He clicked the remote, and a series of charts populated the screen: production output, budget allocations, headcounts versus performance metrics. Every bar and line represented weeks of analysis by our top consultants, including insights drawn from my own confidential assessments. When we reached the slide bearing Blair's department, the atmosphere shifted. Her division, responsible for regional marketing campaigns, showed a troubling trend: rising expenses, stagnant growth, and an inflated budget disproportionate to deliverables. The suggestion floated on the screen: consolidate marketing teams and reassign leadership. Evaluate individual performance for reassignment or demotion. A hush fell over the room. Blair's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles betraying her fear. I watched her momentarily, recalling how she had dismissed me as trivial only days before. Her sense of superiority had given her a false shield. Now, that shield lay shattered by the cold logic of corporate governance. I felt no pleasure in her discomfort, only a resolute commitment to fairness and efficiency. The company's health was paramount, and I refused to let nepotism or personal grudges cloud my judgment. The CEO continued, detailing the rationale. We've cross-referenced project outcomes, client satisfaction scores, and cost overruns. Data indicates that 3 regional managers, including Ms. Callan, have consistently underperformed relative to their compensation. Reassignment to a market with growth potential but lower overhead could recalibrate expectations and provide development opportunities. His tone remained neutral, but the implication was clear: Blair would face a demotion unless she chose to step aside. A murmur rose from one of the board members, a longtime ally of Blair's father. "Isn't this abrupt?" he asked, brows knitted in concern. "She's only been in this role 2 years. Shouldn't we allow more time for improvement?" His voice carried genuine worry, or so it seemed. I uncrossed my arms and spoke, voice calm yet firm. "The data doesn't lie. We afforded Ms. Callan ample opportunity and resources. Yet performance metrics have not improved, and the financial impact continues to grow. Our fiduciary responsibility compels us to act decisively." I paused to let the words resonate. If we delay, we risk further inefficiencies and undermine the credibility of our performance standards. Several executives nodded in agreement. My statement reinforced a culture of accountability. No one, regardless of seniority or connections, was immune to scrutiny. I sensed Blair's eyes on me, a mixture of betrayal and grudging respect flickering in their depths. She realized that I would not bend for her, even as a family member by marriage. My allegiance lay with the company's welfare. The board moved to a vote. As each hand went up, I noted the unanimous decision in favor of the restructuring plan. Blair remained silent, her slim form slumped in defeat. The CEO concluded, "The resolution passes. The human resources team will coordinate reassignment discussions with affected managers, including Ms. Callan, over the next week." He replaced the slide and advanced to the next topic, leaving Blair to grapple with the fallout. After the meeting adjourned, I lingered as colleagues filtered out, exchanging hushed commentary about the bold move. Finally, only Blair and I remained. She stood by the door, her face pale and drawn. I approached and offered a gentle nod. "Your reassignment will be to our regional office in Fargo, North Dakota," I said quietly. "It's a growing market with room for improvement. And with your skills, I believe you'll excel." She blinked, tears glistening unshed. "A demotion," she whispered, voice hoarse. "You're sending me thousands of miles away." Her anger surfaced in tremulous waves. "You could have fired me." Her words struck me, but I recognized the trembling edge of vulnerability beneath her fury. I shook my head. "Firing would have ruined your career. This reassignment comes with a robust support package. Relocation assistance, training opportunities, and a performance-based severance option should you choose to depart. I want to see you succeed, Blair, but you must face the challenges you've created." My tone was compassionate, but unwavering. "Consider this a wake-up call." She looked away, shoulders quaking. I understand." The admission seemed to drain her pride, but also hinted at acceptance. I offered a final reassurance. "I have confidence in your potential. Use this opportunity wisely." Then I turned and walked out, leaving her in a moment of introspection. As I emerged into the corridor, Karina appeared at the other end, her expression thoughtful. She greeted me with a soft smile and linked her arm through mine. "You did what you had to do," she said. Her gratitude warmed me more than any accolade. "Thank you for your integrity," she added. I smiled back, feeling the weight of responsibility ease. "Thank you for believing in me," I replied. Now we move forward together. Walking down the hallway, I reflected on the upheaval I had unleashed. The shift was more than organizational. It was a testament to the power of truth and accountability. Blair's reassignment would serve as a lasting reminder that assumptions had consequences, and that real leadership meant making difficult choices even when family ties were at stake. And in that truth, I found both satisfaction and a renewed sense of purpose. The week after the barbecue moved with the momentum of a freight train, deadlines and decisions piling up like freight cars behind the locomotive of change. I arrived at the office on Monday morning to find the boardroom buzzing with nervous energy. The midday sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows over stacks of printed reports and glossy financial statements. I set my briefcase on the polished mahogany table, took a steadying breath, and signaled for the meeting to begin. "Good afternoon, everyone," I said, voice calm but carrying the weight of authority honed by years of quietly orchestrating outcomes. Directors, department heads, and senior managers looked up from their notes, the tension in the room tangible. Eyes flicked to the projector screen where the first slide read, "Restructuring, Phase 2." In the days since the barbecue, I had worked closely with our CFO and a cross-functional task force to refine the plans I had introduced last week. Now, it was time to turn talk into action. I clicked the remote, and a bar chart appeared, one that tracked departmental performance against budget over the past 4 quarters. It wasn't a flattering picture. While overall revenue had grown, pockets of inefficiency remained stubborn. Marketing expenses soared even as customer engagement plateaued. Operations costs crept upward despite automation investments. The slide concluded with a bullet point: immediate realignment and leadership reassignment required. I scanned the room and held their gaze. "These figures are unacceptable," I said. "We can no longer tolerate sustained underperformance anywhere in the company. We owe it to our stakeholders, our employees, and our clients to act decisively." My words settled over them, the clarity of purpose dispelling any lingering doubt about the path forward. That's when the slide shifted to Blair's division, highlighted in crimson. Her name, Ms. Callan, appeared under Regional Marketing, West Coast Sector, followed by bullet points that spelled out her shortcomings, missed campaign deadlines, cost overruns, and feedback from clients citing missed briefings and miscommunication. I watched the subtle tightening around her eyes as she absorbed the reality laid bare for everyone. I pressed the remote and advanced to the next slide, which outlined the proposed course of action. For Ms. Callan's division, I said, pausing for emphasis, we will implement a leadership reassignment. She will transition to our Fargo, North Dakota branch, effective immediately. This move, while a demotion in title, comes with a comprehensive support package, including relocation assistance, professional development workshops, and an option for a performance-based severance if she chooses not to relocate. A sift of murmurs rippled through the assembled group. A senior VP cleared his throat. Isn't that a harsh measure? He asked, forwarding the perennial question about balancing compassion with accountability. Perhaps a probationary period here would suffice. I glanced at him, offering a respectful nod before leaning forward. We offered probation and additional resources over the past year, as documented in her reviews. Unfortunately, the metrics show no sustained improvement. It's imperative we uphold the same standards for every executive. If we hesitate now, it undermines our credibility. Blair's lip quivered as she exchanged a quick, desperate glance with HR's regional lead seated beside her. I could see the fear in her eyes. Fear not just for her career, but for her reputation among peers who once viewed her as untouchable. Yet I felt no satisfaction in her discomfort. Rather, I was resolute that fairness sometimes required difficult choices. The CFO interjected with the vote tally form, outlining how each board member should register their agreement or dissent. Hands raised swiftly in favor, and when it was clear the motion carried unanimously, I allowed myself a small nod of appreciation. The message was clear. Our organization stood united behind accountability and performance. As the meeting ended, colleagues filtered out, murmuring about the bold move. I remained seated for a moment, gathering my papers, when Blair approached. Her posture was straighter than I would have expected, shoulders squared as though bracing for a final exchange. She met my eyes, her own filled with a complex blend of indignation and something like respect. Mr. Callan, she began, voice trembling but steady, I understand why you did it. I just wish I'd had the chance to prove myself. I regarded her for a beat, weighing my words carefully. You had every chance, I replied quietly. We provided feedback, resources, and guidance. You were the one who chose shortcuts and took credit for others' work. This reassignment is not a punishment, but an opportunity to rebuild your approach and your integrity. She swallowed hard, her lower lip quivering. Fargo, she whispered, as though tasting the word. It's so far, I offered her a gentle smile. Growth often happens outside our comfort zones. I believe you can rise to the challenge. And if you choose the severance package, that option remains on the table. Her gaze flicked away, then back to me with a glimmer of determination. Thank you, she said, her tone uncharacteristically sincere. I'll take the opportunity. I nodded, standing and extending a hand. I'm confident you'll succeed. Outside the boardroom, I found Karina waiting, her expression a blend of pride and concern. She slipped her hand into mine as we walked down the corridor. You handled that beautifully, she said softly. I squeezed her hand. Thank you, I replied. It was necessary. Her brow furrowed slightly. Are you sure you're all right? I paused, leaning against the window ledge. The city skyline stretched beyond the glass, a testament to the enterprise we built together. I am, I said, inhaling deeply. Sometimes the hardest cuts produce the cleanest slate. Karina rested her head on my shoulder. I love you, she murmured. I kissed her temple. And I love you, I responded. Now, I added with a half smile, let's go home. We've earned a quiet evening. As we left the office, I felt the weight of leadership settle back into a comfortable rhythm. The week's clean cuts would ripple through the company, sparking renewed focus and efficiency. And while Blair's chapter was temporarily altered, I believe that this reset would ultimately serve her growth and the integrity of the organization, as much as it served my own need for justice. The fallout began almost the moment I stepped through our front door, still carrying the weight of the boardroom's verdict on my shoulders. My phone vibrated insistently in my pocket as Karina dropped her keys into the bowl by the entryway. I glanced at the screen. Lorraine's name filled the caller ID, followed by a string of missed messages. I silenced it and set my briefcase down, but the buzzing didn't stop, the oven timer chiming in the background, the front doorbell ringing politely. even the chime of an email notification from my company's internal system. Each ping felt like a reminder that my personal life had suddenly become as public as my corporate one. In the living room, a stack of casserole dishes lined the coffee table, each wrapped in aluminum foil and labeled in Lorraine's precise handwriting: chicken Alfredo, green bean casserole, sweet potato bake. The sheer volume of food spoke volumes. Apologies baked into every inch of that suburban archetype of contrition. I knew the gesture was genuine in intent, but the sight of it made my chest tighten. Karina must have intercepted the first wave of messages. Texts pleading for forgiveness, lengthy emails confessing ignorance, and at least one letter handwritten on stationery bearing our family crest. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had never cared enough to ask who I was, yet now they wanted to bake their regrets into my dinner. I went to the kitchen and unpacked the dishes with Karina's help. She set one casserole on the stovetop and placed another in the fridge. "They're trying," she said quietly, her eyes fixed on the silver lids. "But it doesn't erase what happened." I nodded, peeling back a corner of foil to let the steam escape. The aroma of cheese and herbs filled the space, warm and familiar. "I know," I replied, "and I appreciate the effort, but apologies can't rebuild trust overnight." She reached out and took my hand, her thumb brushing my knuckles. "Do you regret it?" she asked, voice low enough for only me to hear. I met her gaze and shook my head. No, they needed to see the consequences of their assumptions. On my phone, the notifications had morphed into pleas from Blair. "Please, Karina, talk to him. I'm sorry. I'll do anything." The messages blurred into one another. Tears, promises, frantic assurances that she would change. I resisted the urge to delete them in a single swipe. Instead, I let them sit, a testament to the chain reaction I had set in motion. When Blair's husband called, his voice was strained. "Look, we can work this out. Just tell me what he wants." I replied with a brief text. "He wants accountability and respect." No response came, but I sensed that the silence hurt more than any words I could craft. That evening, as Karina and I sat down to an impromptu dinner of mashed potatoes and roasted chicken, nothing extravagant, cooked by us, I pulled my laptop onto the table to catch up on urgent emails. My inbox was a hybrid of business and personal upheaval. Reports from the regional managers acutely aware of the board's new expectations, requests for one-on-one meetings, but also follow-up emails from Lorraine outlining when she planned to deliver those casseroles, an RSVP for Thanksgiving, and a reminder that she had already started knitting me a scarf for winter. I closed the laptop gently, the glow of the screen dimming to reveal my reflection in the dark glass. I barely recognized the man who exhaled slowly and set the computer aside. The power I wielded felt different now, both intoxicating and isolating. Karina cleared her throat, stirring her green beans with a wooden spoon. "Your father-in-law called, too," she said. "He left a message about coming over tomorrow to talk things through." I pictured Harold's earnest expression as he tried to articulate remorse without sounding patronizing. "Tell him dinner's at 7, I said, attempting levity, "and that I'll be wearing jeans, not a suit." She smiled wryly. "I'll remind him it's a family gathering, not a board meeting." We laughed softly, but the undercurrent of tension remained, reminding us that our home had become the nexus of corporate drama and familial reckonings. Later, I retreated to my study to review the final audit of Blair's performance report, her reassignment package, and the severance clause that lingered on the table like a silent choice. I traced the margin notes with my fingertip, noticing where I had circled phrases about growth potential and leadership development. My intention had been to leave the door open for redemption, but the weight of my expectations pressed firmly on the page. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, remembering the way Blair's defiance had flickered and given way to something more authentic. Perhaps that was the purpose of this fallout. To strip away the artifice and expose the raw material for genuine change. At bedtime, Karina joined me in the study, leaning against the doorframe. She held up her phone, displaying a message from Blair. "Thank you for not letting me fail quietly." The words seemed to have a bittersweet ring. Karina's eyes glistened with empathy. "Even she sees it as an opportunity now," she murmured. I reached out and took her hand, drawing her beside me. "That's the hope," I said. "That through the discomfort, something real can grow." As I closed my laptop and stood to turn off the light, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me. Yes, the messages would continue, the casseroles would multiply, and the apologies would pour in. But the real work lay in forging new connections built on honesty and mutual respect. In our marriage and in my corporate responsibilities, I had learned that boundaries needed to be tested before they could be redefined. The family fallout was not an ending, but a crucible, a trial by fire that would forge stronger bonds or reveal irreparable fractures. Either way, I welcomed the clarity. I had stepped out of the background once to claim my truth. Now, I would walk forward, illuminated by the consequences and guided by the promise of transformation. I stepped into the grand ballroom feeling a surge of anticipation mingled with a familiar undercurrent of nerves. The room was awash in warm amber light, crystal chandeliers casting shimmering reflections on the polished hardwood floors. Long tables dressed in crisp white linen stretched before me, each place setting arranged meticulously with gleaming silverware and delicate china. Guests milled in animated clusters, wine glasses balanced on fingertips as laughter wove itself through polite conversation. A string quartet tucked into a corner played a gentle serenade, the notes drifting like a fine mist across the space, smoothing edges of anxiety and reminding everyone of the evening's elegance. At the far end of the room, Gregory Holt stood behind the restored mahogany podium, his posture regal, suit tailored to perfection. He surveyed the assembled crowd with the assured gaze of a conductor before lifting the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice calm yet resonant, "it is my privilege to introduce a leader whose vision and steadfast integrity have guided our organization to remarkable growth. Please join me in welcoming our chairman, Mr. Callan." Applause rose like a wave, polite at first, then more fervent as I stepped forward, smoothing the lapels of my jacket with careful composure. I paused at the podium, allowing the room to settle into silence. The faces before me shimmered in the low light, board members who had once questioned my ambition, department heads who had chafed under my standards, colleagues who now regarded me with fresh respect. In the back row, near the exit, sat Blair, her posture rigid, expression carefully neutral. She clutched the stem of her wine glass as though bracing against an unseen gale, knuckles white. "Thank you, Gregory," I said, voice steady. I drew a breath, then continued without skipping a beat. "Tonight, we celebrate excellence, individual achievements that reflect dedication, creativity, and collaboration. But true leadership is defined not only by our victories, but by our willingness to confront shortcomings." A subtle murmur rippled through the audience. I watched Blair's gaze flicker, betraying recognition of the speech's deeper intent. When I assumed this role, I went on, I discovered that silence can mask problems just as easily as it protects reputations. It was tempting to maintain facades rather than face uncomfortable truths, but leadership demands transparency. We must shine light into every corner, acknowledge where we falter, and transform those moments into fuel for improvement. Accountability is not retribution. It is the cornerstone of progress. My words seemed to settle over the hall like a gentle rain, and I felt the tension in Blair's direction deepen, as though each sentence tightened a coil inside her. I shifted to highlight the year's successes, letting images dance across the screen behind me, product launches, community initiatives, teamwork in action. Each name called for an award drew genuine applause, the energy lifting the gathering into a spirit of unity. Yet even as smiles spread and congratulations echoed, the undercurrent of reflection remained. The applause for one winner carried the memory of another's absence, reminding everyone that success and accountability walked hand in hand. As the final recipient stepped down amid cheers, I returned to the podium for closing remarks. "Let us carry this spirit forward," I urged, not as a destination, but as a compass guiding our future endeavors. May we embrace responsibility, learn from our missteps, and uplift one another toward even greater heights. Raising my glass in a silent toast, I watched as dozens of glasses lifted in unison, the glint of glass against light a silent affirmation of shared commitment. When the room erupted into a standing ovation, the sound felt like thunder echoing in every corner of my being. After stepping off the stage, I navigated a tide of well-wishers eager to shake my hand, express gratitude, and pose for photos. Each handshake felt like another brick laid in a foundation of mutual respect. Among the crowd, I caught glimpses of colleagues who had once doubted my methods now offering sincere praise. The transformation was subtle yet profound. Complacency replaced by curiosity, indifference tempered by recognition of standards upheld without favoritism. Then, as the reception shifted into more intimate clusters, I felt a cautious presence approach. Blair emerged from a group near the exit, her steps hesitant but determined. She paused before me, gaze a complex blend of defiance and vulnerability. I set aside the glass I'd been holding and offered her my full attention. "You humiliated me," she whispered, voice trembling with hurt and anger. Her words hung between us like fragile glass. I regarded her calmly, refusing to let bitterness dictate my response. "I didn't humiliate you," I said softly. "You did that yourself, with arrogance and indifference." I merely held up a mirror. The fire in her eyes flickered, confusion and relief mingling in that moment of truth. Her shoulders sagged as if a weight had lifted. The rigid mask dropped, revealing a flicker of recognition that perhaps I had offered her more than punishment. I had offered clarity. I inclined my head in a gesture of understanding. "There is still a path forward," I added gently. "One built on respect and accountability. Choose it, and you will find support rather than scorn." Blair drew a breath and nodded, tears shining at the corners of her eyes. I stepped aside, allowing her space to process. As she melted back into the crowd, I felt the final chord of the evening resonate within me. The meeting had achieved its purpose, to honor achievement, but also to underscore the values that sustain success. In the hushed conversations that followed, in the renewed energy I sensed among my colleagues, I knew tonight's message would echo long after the lights dimmed. Walking alongside Gregory toward the exit balcony for a moment of respite, I inhaled the night air, the city skyline glimmering beyond us. He clapped me on the shoulder with a rare smile. "Well done," he said simply. I nodded, chest humming with the satisfaction of hard-won change. The evening had been more than a ceremony. It had been a declaration of principles. And in that declaration, I had reaffirmed not only my own purpose, but the future we would build together. One grounded in accountability, authenticity, and shared respect. The following holiday season arrived with its customary blend of crisp air, twinkling lights, and the promise of family gatherings. This time, however, the annual barbecue looked different in my mind's eye. No longer would I slip into the background, the silent observer who carried plates and washed dishes without comment. Instead, I would take my place deliberately. No longer the invisible appendage to Karina's family, but an equal whose presence they could not ignore. On the morning of the barbecue, I slipped into the garage and slid into the driver's seat of my Tesla, its midnight black finish gleaming even under the soft glow of dawn. I had parked it there deliberately, just as I had at the first barbecue when fate intervened. Today, I wanted the car to wait patiently at the edge of the driveway, a subtle reminder of the life I led beyond their assumptions. I washed my hands, slipped on a well-cut navy sweater over a crisp white shirt, and checked my reflection in the garage mirror. No uniform, no camouflage, just a man comfortable in his own success and identity. By the time I walked up the pathway to the backyard, I heard the laughter and chatter of Karina's relatives echoing like a warm chorus. The early winter sun filtered through the bare branches of oak and maple trees, casting long shadows that danced across the patio stones. A table laden with festive fare, turkey legs, spiced cider, roasted chestnuts, beckoned me forward, but I paused at the threshold, savoring this moment of transition. Karina stood near the grill, her cheeks rosy from the cool air and anticipation. She smiled when she saw me, relief and pride mingling in her gaze. I nodded in quiet acknowledgement, then strode into the gathering with measured steps. The subtle shift rippled through the group like a gentle current. Lorraine set down her carving knife mid-slice, surprise flickering across her features. Harold paused in mid-blend of cider spices, eyes widening as he took in my attire and confident posture. Blair, who hovered near the punch bowl, blinked rapidly, as though still adjusting to the realization that I was neither meek nor silent. Even Zoe, gossip eager on Karina's cousin, froze mid-whisper. Children glanced up from their snowball practice, curious at the sight of me walking tall rather than lingering at the margins. I approached the buffet table and filled my plate casually, selecting a roll and a portion of roasted vegetables. Karina slipped her arm through mine and leaned in. "You look amazing," she whispered, her voice warm. I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Thank you for believing in me," I replied. Then, lifting my chin toward her family, I added aloud, "Happy holidays, everyone." A collective intake of breath greeted my greeting, drawing the group's attention. Lorraine recovered first, offering me a tentative smile. "Happy holidays," she echoed. A silence hovered, as though they were waiting for me to falter, to revert to the mailman, that had once deemed me. Instead, I set down my plate on a nearby side table and turned to face them fully. I've thought a lot about this family tradition, I began, voice clear and steady. About the way I've shown up here over the years, silent, observing, accommodating. But this year feels different. Karina and I have grown in ways that demand honesty and presence. I paused to let the gravity of my words settle. I want you to know who I am, not because I need your approval, but because respect must be mutual. Heads tilted, expressions softening as they absorbed my message. Lorraine's hand flew to her heart, her lips parting in surprise. Harold cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. Blair's eyes glistened, her earlier defiance giving way to something more vulnerable. I continued, I am the man who delivers letters with pride, but I am also the man who leads this company as chairman. I cherish the simple joy of community, but I also carry responsibilities my silence once concealed. Today, I stand before you not as a placeholder, but as Karina's partner, with an identity you are welcome to acknowledge without pretension. A gentle murmur rippled through the crowd, a blend of awe and contrition. Lorraine stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on my arm. I'm sorry, truly, she said, voice thick with emotion. I never meant to overlook you. Harold nodded vigorously, cheeks flushed. We didn't realize. Blair joined them, her voice small but sincere. I'm sorry, too. I respect you so much. I offered each apology a nod of acceptance. Thank you, I replied. Let's make this holiday one of genuine connection. Karina, would you do the honors? I turned to my wife, who beamed with pride as she took up the carving knife. She looked at her family with a new sense of authority, her posture regal yet warm. As she began to carve the turkey, laughter returned to the gathering, this time infused with authenticity rather than politeness. Yes drifted toward me, questions and compliments spilling over one another about my company's growth, my thoughts on community outreach, and even simple inquiries into my favorite holiday traditions. I answered with openness, surprised by how natural it felt to share. Children tugged at my sleeve, asking if I'd join their snowball game. I ruffled their hair and accepted, making room for joy in the crisp air. The backyard transformed into a landscape of genuine engagement, relationships budding where superficiality once held sway. Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, I found myself standing near the fence where ivy curled around weathered boards. Karina joined me, leaning into my side as she wrapped a scarf around her neck. You did it, she said softly, voice edged with triumph. I wrapped an arm around her shoulders. We did it, I corrected, pulling her close. A family can only grow when every member shows their true self. We watched as relatives mingled, their laughter genuine, their conversations animated with curiosity rather than assumption. Blair approached us, holding 2 mugs of hot cider. She handed one to me and offered a tentative smile. Thank you, she said simply. I accepted the mug, feeling its warmth seep into my palm. Thank you, I replied. As night deepened, the backyard lanterns glowed softly, casting a golden halo over the gathering. I raised my mug in a silent toast to the moment when I ceased to be just the mailman and became a partner fully seen, respected, and embraced. In that shared glow, surrounded by family reclaimed, I felt more at home than ever before.